the great flood washed away the giants, imprisoned the watchers, and silenced the cries of a corrupted world. Yet one question lingers, like an echo across the ages: what became of their wives? These women, once mortal, once touched by heaven itself, did not vanish with the waters. Their fate is darker, stranger, and far more disturbing than we've been told. Some say they became witches, carrying forbidden magic into the hearts of men. Others whisper of a curse, transforming them into the sirens of the deep creatures whose songs could shatter reason and drag sailors to watery graves. Drop a 777, comment, like, and subscribe if you feel the chill of this mystery, because what you are about to uncover will not only test your imagination, but shake the very foundations of your belief. This is the forbidden tale of the wives of the fallen angels after the flood. What did the wives of the fallen angels do on earth after the flood? You won't believe. A long time ago, angels descended from heaven and set foot upon the earth, leaving the high places to walk among mortals. They looked upon the daughters of the earth, were enchanted by their beauty, and kindness fell in love with them and chose to marry them, taking them into their households and binding their lives together. With these wives, something remarkable unfolded, something the world had not seen before, because the angels began to share the hidden things. They alone had kept the private arts, guarded methods, and secret knowledge that belonged to them. Under this quiet instruction, the women learned to work magic, to brew mixtures like potions, to stir conditions that unsettled the ordinary order of days, and to call up effects that ordinary hands could not achieve. At first, the changes looked bright and wonderful. Small marvels appeared in common rooms. Fires leapt to life at a gesture. Fevers eased as if a cool wind had passed, and wounds closed with a touch that seemed to steady the flesh. Yet this magic was nothing like the harmless tricks told in stories or shown upon a stage. It carried sharp edges, and hidden snares behaved in ways no one could fully predict, and brought dangers and difficulties that shadowed every success. Boundaries proved fragile, outcomes slid sideways, and what was meant to help sometimes turned until the people around them began to grow afraid of these new powers and the noise that followed their use. The magic practiced by the wives of the fallen angels was strong, swift, and effective, but it could easily bend toward harm when handled without care, guided by pride or driven by haste. Because of this double edge, the women came to be known as the first witches, and the arts they practiced were judged to be stained a contaminated magic that brought more trouble than remedy and left more questions than peace behind it. It was as if a child were suddenly handed a wand without being taught the rules, the limits, or the steps of restraint. The result could be a burst of light at the wrong moment, a flame that ran along a thatch roof, a draft meant for healing that soured into something bitter, and other unexpected, frightening turns that no one wanted and few could stop. In time, through costly mistakes and lessons branded into memory, these first witches learned what power truly demanded, that not all magic is good simply because it can be done, and that great power carries great responsibility. Responsibility to measure intentions, to hold back when wisdom says wait, and to choose the narrow path that protects rather than the easy act that invites chaos. By the time the oldest traditions set the record into writing, consequence had overtaken wonder. What began as borrowed power had become transgression, and the stories fixed a chain of cause and effect. According to the Book of Enoch, there were tales in which the wives of the fallen angels did not remain as ordinary women, but underwent a strange transformation. They became mermaids. One strand of that story says, the change was not a simple disguise, but a true alteration of nature, so that instead of living only on land, they were now creatures of water and song. As the account tells it, these transformed wives swam through the depths of the sea, moved with ease beneath the waves, and learned to shape their voices into fascinating songs. Those songs, sweet and irresistible, reached the ears of sailors and fishermen, drew them off their safe courses, and led them toward mysterious coasts that few had mapped and dangerous passages where currents curled and rocks waited. The tale lingers on the wonder and the risk. In equal measure, the grace of the swimming figure, the bright pull of the melody, and the shadow that follows when enchantment meets the open water. It sets before the listener a world thick with magic and mystery, a world in which the sea is not space, but a living realm, and in which extraordinary beings might dwell far below the line of the waves. And then, it stops to pose the old dilemma. In plain words, does this mermaid really exist? Or is it just an ancient explanation that humans used to make sense of what they could not understand? Whether one takes the account as a report or a metaphor, the shape of the story invites the imagination to travel and to picture those incredible creatures gliding where the light begins to fade and the ocean keeps its secrets. The longer memory of mermaids also runs through the mythology of ancient Greece, a culture of grand narratives and enduring images whose echoes still carry. Around 3 centuries before Christ Greek, storytellers began to speak of mysterious beings linked to the vast and unpredictable seas, and Greek artists, painters, and sculptors with confident hands fixed their likenesses in works that outlasted the voices that first described them. In that tradition, the creatures we now fold into the word mermaid were often shown with majestic bird-like bodies, wings outstretched, feathers rendered in vivid colors, and the heads of women whose faces held both beauty and intent. What set them apart most of all, however, was their voice. The reports insist that the sound they made was so melodious and clear that even seasoned cruisemen who knew winds and reefs by practice more than by maps could be mesmerized. Drawn by those seductive songs, ships inched closer and closer, where the water grew treacherous and the sharp rocks rose just beneath the surface. In these Greek stories, whole vessels succumbed to the charm drifted from known routes, foundered on unknown shores, or slipped under into the depths of the sea. The point was not only to thrill, but to warn, to remind listeners of the dangers that wait for anyone who yields to temptation without weighing the cost, and to show how desire once stirred by a perfect note can carry a person farther than intended. For that reason, the sirens gathered now by many into the larger family of mermaids stood not merely as creatures of fable, but as symbols of danger and desire, figures that held together beauty and risk in the same form. Their legends continued to resonate from age to age, giving artists new subjects, writers new metaphors, and people of every time and place a language for all the bright lures that lead toward peril. The Book of Enoch is presented as a work that speaks to many concerns raised by Scripture, offering answers on themes that the canonical books also address, and its reception history is part of the point being made. Although many Christians assume that the books now bound into the Bible are the only containers of truth. This text reminds readers that Enoch was discovered in the same context as those books, and that people in authority once chose to exclude it from the final collection. That decision, the argument continues, does not diminish the book's credibility, and may even suggest it carries more weight than most have granted. With that frame in place, attention turns to what Enoch says about the sea creatures called sirens. The book mentions a set of enigmatic beings and links them with the origin of what we now call sirens, placing the scene at the beginning of history and identifying a specific order of angels. The Watchers who descended to earth took human wives and mated with them. From that union came the giants named in the book of Genesis, a line that stands as the chief result of the crossing of boundaries between heaven and earth. The story then traces the cost of that act for everyone involved: the Watchers, their children known as the Nephilim, and the women who joined themselves to the Watchers. The price did not fall evenly. The Watchers were confined in a region called Tartarus. The Nephilim were swept away when a great flood overtook the world, and the women who had mated with the Watchers were placed under a distinct curse. In the wording preserved in Enoch 19:2, the women also of the angels who got lost will become mermaids, a line that is used to explain how the wives were transformed and how the figure of the mermaid enters this tradition. Read straight, the sequence maintains a clear order: forbidden union, the rise of giants' judgment by flood, the imprisonment of the angelic offenders, and a transformation that marks the women who shared in the trespass. The narrative does not wander from these points or try to widen them into other myths. It keeps its focus on cause and effect, what the Watchers did, what followed for their offspring, and what became of their wives. Within that frame, credibility is treated not as a popularity contest, but as a matter of witness. The book is said to have been found alongside the canonical writings. It records the Watchers, the Nephilim, and the flood in a way that aligns with the broad outline familiar from Genesis, and it adds a specific detail about the women becoming mermaids that helps account for siren lore within a biblical adjacent story world. Without promising conclusions beyond the scope of the text, this retelling preserves the original's main ideas and events in the same order: Enoch's perceived authority, the role of the Watchers, the emergence of the giants, the judgment by flood, the imprisonment in Tartarus, and the women's transformation into mermaids, as stated in Enoch 19:2. Two different kinds of creatures have been called sirens, and the word has carried more than one image across time. First, there is the Greek siren, imagined in the old tales as a marvelous hybrid, half bird and half human, whose form joined wings, feathers, and a woman's face. Second, the same term siren is often used interchangeably with mermaid, especially in later retellings and modern speech. Over the centuries, the usage narrowed and then spread again. In many stories, siren points to a particular type of being famous for singing a mesmerizing song that draws men off their ships and out into open water, where they lose their way and meet their end. Popular culture keeps this thread alive. For example, the television series Sirens centers its plot on mermaids and the dangers around them, because many legends describe mermaids as women who were once human. Several films and shows portray them transforming into human form. For a time, usually to echo how they were first discovered on land. At the same time, Those same stories insist that a curse binds them, so they cannot truly return to ordinary human life, and they caution that in reality, they would not appear as impossibly beautiful as art often claims. In this mix of meanings and portrayals, the word siren now covers older Greek bird women and later sea women alike, and both strands keep the core idea of an alluring presence linked to peril on the water. As readers move through the Bible, they sometimes take certain verses to refer to mermaids, and they say that personal encounters with such beings support that reading. One line in Scripture is cited to frame the whole question of the sea's spiritual status in the vision of the world to come. It is stated that there will be no seas in the new earth. From that statement, some infer a judgment on the oceans themselves, suggesting that God views the great waters as ungodly, perhaps precisely because demonic sea spirits often identified with mermaids would occupy and haunt those depths. The wording most often quoted comes from what is called the first verse of the book of Revelation. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. In that light, the sea becomes more than a geographical feature. It becomes a sign of forces that will not pass into the renewed creation, and mermaids are placed within that sign as part of a larger spiritual threat that the final future removes. Given that these beings are said to appear in the Bible, the conclusion is drawn that such humanoid water-dwelling creatures survived the Great Flood. Water is named as their native element, so it follows in this line of thought that even in the present age, there would be many sightings, reports, and accounts whenever they are encountered. To call these entities demonic is presented as an understatement. People speak of personal experiences with these monsters and offer those experiences as evidence that the label fits. Testimonies from those who have come into contact with them describe a malicious nature, an intent that turns toward destruction, and an aggression that confirms what the stories already warned, that behind the beauty and the song, there stands a threat. In this retelling ancient vocabulary, modern media, scriptural interpretation, and reported experience all converge on the same picture. The sirens, mermaids of lore and sighting are not harmless curiosities, but beings linked to danger born of the sea and judged by their relentless pull toward harm. Centuries later, the sea kept its habit of answering with glimpses, not proofs. The vocabulary changed: cameras, submersibles, and statements, but the tension between denial and witness remained the same. In 2012, the day Animal Planet aired Camera Captures Mermaid on Submersible, the world inhaled and went still. A pale hand struck the window of a deep-sea craft, a human-like outline hovering in pressure, and night, and then it was gone. Skeptics shouted trickery. Wired mocked the spectacle, and agencies like NOAA issued careful lines about a lack of evidence for aquatic humanoids. Yet a statement is not a verdict, and silence is not proof of absence. Remember the planet we stand on. Water rules its face. The ocean spans more than 361 million square kilometers, and humanity has mapped in detail only 5%, roughly 18 million. That leaves more than 343 million square kilometers unlit and unmeasured, a kingdom where seafloor mountains rise higher than Everest, trenches fall deeper than the Grand Canyon, and living bodies write with cold fire across the black. The giant squid lived there in rumor for centuries before science finally met it in the 21st century. If a creature that large could hide in plain abyss, what else waits beyond our lamps? Here is the edge we keep circling. Despite the arguments millions still believe, they do not hear fantasy. They hear memory with blurred edges. Perhaps that hand on the submersible glass was not a hoax, but a brief report from the other side of our ignorance. Until we uncover more than 5% of the sea's dominion, the question will keep knocking like a faint tap on thick glass. Have we already met the mermaids and simply chosen to look away? Imagine facing these mythological creatures. Their heads were as beautiful as those of ordinary women with long, wavy hair that caught the sunlight and seemed to ripple like water. Their features were unmistakably human, yet carried an aura of mystery and glamour, a quiet magnetism that could hold the gaze of anyone who looked upon them. Their eyes shone with an inner light, their lips curved as if always on the edge of a song, and their expressions suggested secrets learned from wind and wave. What set them apart, however, was the rest of their form. Instead of human legs, they bore the noble bodies of great birds, broad chests, and powerful wings that appeared woven from pure radiance, cloaked in feathers that flashed with vivid color. Each motion felt effortless and exact, as though they were born to move between elements air and sea without strain. They hovered above spray and crest, gliding with a poise that seemed both natural and otherworldly, as if dream stuff had been given shape. This vision of the sirens was more than a passing fantasy. It was a deliberate act of imagination by the ancient Greeks, who looked at the world with a craftsman's eye and an artist's courage. They found beauty in the curve of a shell, wonder in the turn of a gull's wing, meaning in thunder and tide, and they turned those glimpses into images that endured. In the siren's part, woman part bird, they captured a worldview that blended observation with myth, giving form to the pull of desire and the peril that often follows it. Because of that clarity of vision, the legends of the Greek sirens remain vivid and persuasive, continuing to inspire and to remind us how rich mythology can be, how strongly old stories shape the way we imagine the world and our place within it. Imagine yourself sailing in a small boat, the salty wind stroking your face, while the soft rhythm of waves taps against the hull. The sky is wide, the day is calm, and each breath tastes of brine and sun-warmed wood. Then a distant melody rises so gentle and pure, it seems to drift up from the depths themselves, threading through air and foam, until it surrounds you like a veil. You turn toward the sound, and far ahead, graceful figures lift from the water, their wings beating in slow, measured strokes, their hair flowing as if the sea were still combing it. They are the sirens. Their voices fold around you like a net woven of music, tightening by degrees until your heartbeat quickens and your thoughts blur at the edges. It feels as though a private symphony were being played inside your chest, drawing out emotions you never learned to name, stirring memories and longings that had slept for years. With each stroke of the oar and each foot of water closed, the pull deepens. The song promises hidden knowledge and forbidden sweetness, offers a shore, no map. Record suggests a harbor where every desire is met. You follow, compelled by the sound, even as the water grows darker and deeper, even as the charted path falls away, and the swell turns strange. For a moment, clarity returns, and old warnings flicker tales of the sirens and the wrecks that strewed their haunts, but the spell has already settled. The boat glides on, obedient to the cadence, toward a coast of jagged stone, where the singers wait with smiles, that never quite reach their eyes. From below, sharp rocks climb toward the surface, ready to claim another vessel for the relentless sea. That is the true magic of the sirens. Not only the startling beauty of hair and wing, but the sovereign power of their voices to bewitch and to seduce, to turn even the bravest sailors from the safety of the open course and carry them step by step toward doom. Sirens are enduring, fascinating figures whose beginnings reach back to the myths and legends of the ancient Greek and Germanic worlds, and their image has grown layer by layer over centuries of retelling. In Greek mythology, these beings called sirens were imagined as striking hybrids, beautiful women joined to bird-like bodies, creatures whose presence carried both elegance and peril. Their signature power was the seductive voice, a song described as so sweet and compelling that it could hypnotize sailors and bend the will of even the most seasoned crews. In Germanic tradition, by contrast, the stories use names such as Nixon and allow a wider range of portraits from benevolent water spirits who could show favor or protection to travelers to malevolent entities blamed for storms, fog, and shipwrecks. As these tales moved from one shore to another and from one language to the next, they spread across Europe, gathering new contours and fresh meanings in each culture that adopted them. Some regions came to regard mermaids as keepers of the sea's order, patrons who could bless sailors and grant safe passage, while other regions feared them as omens of bad luck spirits, whose appearance signaled misfortune and loss. The steadfast presence of mermaids and sirens in ancient storytelling bears witness to a deep human bond with the sea and its mysteries, a bond shaped by longing, fear, and wonder. Their narratives settled into the heart of communities and continued to inspire art, music, and poetry, giving makers a language for the ocean's beauty and risk. Over time, the image of mermaids became an enduring symbol. At once, beauty, danger, and desire a mirror for the most persistent elements of the human condition and the choices people make when confronted with what is both enticing and uncertain. The depiction of mermaids and sirens varies from culture to culture, yet many traditions return to a similar pattern, a fusion of human and avian elements that marks these figures as creatures of threshold spaces. Surveying portrayals around the world reveals a rich variety of interpretations and images, each bending the outline to local experience while preserving a recognizable core. Even when details shift, one constant remains the blending of human features with traits borrowed from birds, producing beings that are at once familiar and other. In Greek accounts, the sirens are frequently shown as women whose torsos rise from the bodies of birds, a union that pairs feminine beauty with the grace and freedom of flight. Their majestic wings and enchanting voices fulfill the same role in story after story, making them both irresistible and dangerous to those who travel the sea's open paths. In Germanic legend, the sirens may assume different forms, sometimes as aquatic beings with fish-like characteristics, as water spirits wearing a fully human appearance. Yet the tradition keeps a link to the world of birds, whether through song-feathered symbolism or the idea of swift movement across boundaries. This diversity of representations reflects the depth, nuance, and complexity of the cultures that first told and then retold these tales. As generations passed, mermaids and sirens were reinterpreted and reinvented in new contexts, their roles adjusted to shifting beliefs and changing perceptions about nature, fate, and moral choice. They stand readily in stories of love and tragedy as emblems of danger and desire, but they also appear as guardians of the seas and messengers of the gods, figures called upon to explain calm and storm fortune and loss. Through all of these versions, the combined imagery of woman and bird endures, carrying forward the same tension between allure and warning that made the first stories so memorable. Mermaids have been imagined in many different forms across the centuries, ranging from beings with the head of a woman joined to the body of a bird to more familiar human-fish hybrids whose lower halves end in a sweeping tail. This wide spectrum of images forms a rich tapestry that showcases the boundless imagination and creative impulse of human cultures. In one era, artists emphasized the elegance of wings and the gleam of feathers. In another, they highlighted the sheen of scales and the movement of water. Storytellers, painters, and listeners alike added their own accents so that each retelling contributed new shades of meaning and symbolism without erasing what came before. Across different periods and places, these mystical figures were reinterpreted again and again, sometimes elevated as messengers from the deep, sometimes framed as emblems of temptation and risk. What remained constant was the sense that mermaids stood at the threshold between worlds, part familiar, part other, and that their changing forms mirrored shifting ideas about nature, fate, and the sea. The ongoing variety of depictions testifies to a long conversation about mystery and beauty, a conversation that continued to grow as communities met the ocean's promise and peril, and then carried those impressions back into legend and art. Later, in medieval art, creators favored a different emphasis and showed sirens as hybrids of woman and fish torsos crowned with long flowing hair above shiny scaly tails that curved like living banners. This shift did not erase earlier motifs. Instead, it layered new associations onto them, reflecting the tastes, beliefs, and moral lessons valued by the period. Over the centuries, depictions of sirens continued to evolve, tracking changes in cultural sensibility and in the ways people wished to speak about the sea and the self. During the Renaissance, artists presented them as majestic and enigmatic mythological beings, poised and idealized figures through which viewers could contemplate order, beauty, and the unknown in balanced measure. In the 19th century, amid the currents of romantic thought, mermaids took on a more melancholic and tragic cast, their presence marked by solitude, longing, and the sense of an unattainable shore. Mermaids have long held an important place in many religious and cultural traditions around the world, and their image has shifted with the needs and fears of the communities that told their stories. In some settings, they appear as emblems of spiritual power or hard-won wisdom figures who stand near the sources of storm and calm and therefore seem to speak for the sea itself. In other words, they warn of imminent danger, a living sign that the boundary between safety and peril has grown thin. Their appearances span a full spectrum. At one end are benevolent protectors who look with favor on sailors steady a course or signal a safe harbor. At the other are malevolent entities whose nearness foretells wreck, loss, and sorrow. Certain traditions bind mermaids to divine or supernatural realms, presenting them as messengers of the gods, guardians of ocean mysteries, or local forms of aquatic deities, whose reach is felt in currents, tides, and hidden springs. Elsewhere, especially in coastal lore, a glimpse of a mermaid functions as an omen of disaster, a serious indication that treacherous currents or dangerous reefs lie ahead, and that skill alone will not be enough without caution and humility. Within strands of Christian tradition, sirens are aligned with sin and temptation. Their allure set against the path of virtue, a voice or image that flatters desire and so becomes a weapon of the devil, devised to turn the heart from righteousness and steady discipline. Yet, the same figure can also bear a different charge. For many storytellers and listeners, mermaids have become symbols of freedom and independence, images of untamed will and ungoverned movement that appeal to anyone resisting the weight of convention. Their wild, untamed nature turns them into icons of self-determination and authenticity, stirring those who want to live with passion and courage to imagine their own course over open water. Taken together, these roles show how a single creature can carry meanings as varied as blessing and threat, devotion and defiance, and how the sea's changing face invites human beings to project their deepest hopes and fears onto the waves. At the same time, mermaids challenge the boundary that separates humans from non-humans, creating a sustained meditation on ambiguous identity that many cultures have woven into an intricate tapestry of symbols. Their half-human, half-aquatic form embodies a visible fusion of realms, land and sea breadth and depth, and so they occupy a threshold where categories blur and fixed names loosen. This duality grants them a unique position in story and image. They expose the limits of ordinary labels and press against conventional ideas about what it means to belong. Beneath the seductive surface lies a palpable vulnerability, a note of isolation that rises from their placement between worlds. Many portrayals emphasize the quiet longing for connection that shadows their power, a desire for recognition, home, or rest that cannot be fully satisfied either on shore or in the open ocean. Because they are caught between two worlds, mermaids are often imagined as solitary travelers moving through fathomless waters with grace and restraint, yet never entirely at ease, never entirely estranged, a state that mirrors the human experience of change and searching. Their ambiguous status acts as a reminder of the fragility of the human self, which is always in motion, reshaped by time, trial, and desire. Over generations, artists and audiences have returned to this figure to think about meaning and purpose, to trace how identity stretches without breaking, and to acknowledge that the heart's true work often unfolds in the space between what is known and what remains mysterious. In this way, the mermaid has remained both a mirror and a guide, a storied presence whose beauty marks possibility, whose danger cautions restraint, and whose complexity reflects the ongoing work of becoming fully human. Across all the strands, we've followed the descent of angels and the sharing of forbidden arts, the rise of contaminated magic, and the lesson that power demands restraint, the Enochian thread in which the Watcher's wives are transformed into sea beings, and the long sweep of culture from Greek bird women to Germanic Nixon to medieval fish maidens. One shape keeps returning. Mermaids and sirens sit at the threshold, half familiar, half other, beautiful and perilous at once. They carry meanings about desire and danger, exile and belonging, devotion and defiance. They also carry a memory of consequences, from the Watcher's trespass to flood and imprisonment to metamorphosis. The stories insist that every crossing of a boundary leaves a mark. Later ages translated that mark into art allegory and warning Renaissance poise, romantic melancholy, and coastal lore that treats a sudden sighting as an omen as much as wonder. Set beside those centuries of telling is the modern ledger. We have an ocean that spans more than 361 million square kilometers and detailed maps for only a sliver of it. Creatures once dismissed as Sailors Inc., the giant squid among them entered the catalog of the known only in our own era. Popular media adds its own sparks, a pale hand on a submersible window, a clip that people argue about years later. Denials arrive from official voices, counterclaims arrive from eyewitnesses and believers. Between them stands the fact that most of the sea remains dark to us. Myths, meanwhile, behave like long memories. They compress events, alter faces, and survive because they continue to fit the feelings humans bring to wind, current, and horizon. So where does that leave us? With clarity and with humility. There is, as of today, no verified scientific evidence that aquatic humanoids, mermaids, sirens by any name exist. Statements from agencies and the absence of specimens or reproducible data matter, and they set the bar for proof. At the same time, the lack of proof is not proof of non-existence. An unmapped world does not owe us its disclosures, and the ocean is very nearly the definition of unmapped. It is reasonable to doubt. It is also reasonable to remain open, to let curiosity coexist with caution, while we extend the range of our lights a little farther into the dark. If this story has made you wonder, rethink, or feel that familiar tug from the edge of the chart, help the channel keep exploring the seam between legend and evidence. Subscribe, leave a comment, 777, with your take, myth, metaphor, or memory, and share this episode with someone who loves the deep. If you've got a family tale, a coastal rumor, or a fragment from a text you want us to unpack, next Enoch's other passages, the Watcher's aftermath siren cousins, like the Rusalki or Ningyo, drop it below. Your questions steer what we dive into. Your skepticism sharpens our compass. Until the next voyage, keep a steady hand on the line between awe and inquiry, and keep listening for the notes that rise from below.